One-sided friendships are often signs of people pleasing. I want to share with you a conversation I had with a friend of mine that I hope is a blessing to you as it was to me. She reached out to me about 2 months now, actually, and she mentioned to me just having a question because she was coming to a realization that a friendship of hers has now become one-sided. I was like, okay, well, what do you mean one-sided? What all is happening for it to be one-sided? And she goes on to explain things like feeling like she was always reaching out, the energy wasn't reciprocated, this person never reaches out to her, and even though she's always initiating to hang out, when it comes time to hang out, he bails. She goes on in the midst of explaining a little bit more in detail and context to what's going on, that the last situation that really sparked this question happened the day before we initially had our conversation. But this isn't anything new because this kind of behavior has been repeated in this specific relationship for the past 2 years. And when she initially brought it up, it was about 2 years ago, but nothing has changed. She just goes on to share more and more about how she's acknowledging that there's a certain pattern behind all these things and that she has allowed this behavior to stay in her life. And she sees the patterns. She's just unsure what to do with it in the end. And before she ultimately asks the big question, she essentially comes to the place of acknowledging that she's tired of putting her energy into people who don't care enough to pour it back into her. And so she essentially just asked, what advice do I have on just essentially moving on and not necessarily feeling like you have to grieve or cry in order to do so? The first thing that I shared with her was that it's important to recognize that sometimes, depending on the type of connection and relationship that you have, and to what extent this relationship, was really close, that sometimes you might find yourself needing to grieve the loss of the relationship. And it's not always just grieving in terms of crying. You could just be in forms of just being upset, acknowledging that it sucks, just going through the stages of grief, right, as it lingers a little bit. But it's important to know that it's not always a bad solution or a bad thing to find yourself grieving the loss of a connection, because our bodies typically store so much of those impacts, those wounds. And if we don't allow ourselves to release it, it just really gets pressed in, turns into a barrage of different outcomes, resentment, unprocessed anger, all that kind of stuff. And it really hinders the rest of our relationships around us because we're simply in the way of our own healing by not allowing ourselves to grieve. You lost it. It was something that was important to you. You got to give yourself time to grieve. But outside of that, if you're looking at this connection and you're simply saying, I am no longer willing to waste tears or waste more time on said relationship, I think there's a few key things to keep in mind. I said, number one, it's important to recognize that relationships have seasons. Because relationships have seasons, it's important to know when the season is up. Now, I don't know what the relationship was looking like, a couple years prior, if it was a little bit closer, if there were more opportunities in time that you guys were hanging out, chilling together, all those kinds of things. But it's important to recognize that as relationships move forward, as seasons progress, that not only does certain availabilities and change of availability happen, but sometimes we just need to acknowledge that a season in a relationship is over and it's just time to move forward. And it doesn't make them a villain. It doesn't make them a horrible person. It just gives us the assurance to know that sometimes we did what we could, we did what we knew how, and the relationship is just no longer available to the same degree as maybe it once was in a previous season. The second thing that I reminded her of was that spiritual foundations oftentimes seep into these kinds of conversations, because when it comes to relationships, and specifically when it comes to staying in one-sided friendships, it oftentimes comes from a heart posture of clinging, a heart posture of wanting to really do the best for others, care for others to such great extremes, even to the point of moving away our values and subsiding that stuff to really connect with people. But I want you to hear me when I tell you this, that real love is open-handedness. Real love genuine love. It doesn't matter if it's friendship and platonic, if it's romantic, if it's with your mama, your pappy, anyone else in between. Real love is open-handedness. And open-handedness is what gives people the room to walk out of your life just as smoothly as they walked into your life, without you needing to cling onto them or the desired outcome of the relationship in order for you to be okay. And when we really learn this aspect of love, it actually frees us, maybe in the opposite direction that we assume clinging would do. Typically, we would cling and we would white knuckle because as long as I have them and I keep this person in my life, everything is going to be good. When in reality, that's us clinging to outcomes and clinging to people for a means of peace instead of being able to love others from a place of peace. And loving other people from a place of peace is what allows us to love with an open hand, not needing them to be a certain way, nor needing to cling to people in order for us to be okay in the end. Okay, that's the second thing that I reminded her of. And with love being an open hand, let me just say that love also requires boundaries in order to be healthy. And if you find yourself in often positions and connections abandoning boundaries, abandoning values that you set, well, we're not really doing ourselves a favor. And what maybe was once a friendship is no longer really considered a healthy friendship, to say the least, a friendship at all, honestly, because we are abandoning what we have grounded, what we have established as values and boundaries in our lives in order to make room for someone who clearly doesn't make room for it, doesn't appreciate it, or does not see fit to make adjustments with their behaviors in order to align with the relationship that we desire to create with them. And that's something that I really wanted her to understand, because when we abandon boundaries, when we abandon those things, we're oftentimes putting ourselves in position to abandon peace. And love, at its core, does not invite us to abandon peace to make room for other people. And because I'm already given the peace that I've been promised by God, I don't have to perform or chase after people, cling to people for a means of peace, because I already have peace established in my life. And this is what allows me to love freely, instead of thinking I need to cling to anybody and everybody because this is as good as it's going to get. But if there's one more thing that as I'm thinking about sharing this, I wish I would have said in that specific conversation, and I want to give exclusively to you, is just recognizing that we have to be mindful of what we are labeling as a one-sided friendship, because not every connection that may require you to invest more into others than others investing into you is always a bad thing. When you think about mentorship connections, when you think of perhaps discipleship connections, maybe you have more to lend to others than maybe they have to you. That's not always a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing when we are expecting others to give to us what they don't have the capacity to offer. And when we put people in the lane of friendship who may actually fit more in the description of someone you're discipling, someone you're mentoring, maybe somebody that you are in connection with who you just have room and availability to pour into, to coach, to lead, right? Those kinds of things. We don't need to put them in the same association as a friend, because perhaps they just don't have the capacity in their lives to be the friend you need in this season of life. Doesn't mean you can't serve them. It doesn't mean you can't stay connected with them. It doesn't mean that you cannot pour into them. What it does mean is we have to be mindful of who we're classifying in our relationship circles, because some of us are expecting friendship behavior from people who aren't even on that level, who don't have the capacity to be on that level, and who don't have the capacity to fill us up in a way that perhaps certain friends in this season of life should move about with us and one another in this connection together. It's important to consider who you're labeling as a friend, who you're labeling as a best friend, who you're labeling in these kinds of avenues, Because sometimes, depending on what they show you through their behavior, what they have room to show up for you in, they may not actually be the friend that you hope they could be, or that you may want them to be. So I just want you to consider that in the midst of this conversation, because where we eventually landed here was just me really helping her understand that we have to really establish our values in order to stop putting ourselves in positions to lean so far into one-sided connections, one-sided friendships, or one-sided relationships where we're giving everything and they're returning nothing. We have to be mindful of our values, because when we abandon our values, we find ourselves sticking near and close, clinging to people, trying to change them, or hoping that the more we give, and the more we give, they'll choose to stay and one day hopefully give us what we need. And the problem with this is not only do we end up abandoning our values, completely pushing them to the side in order to serve to this person in whatever way that they see fit or that we hope is most beneficial for the relationship to stay, but we ultimately betray ourselves and end up putting expectations on them to do something for us that we have to learn to be able to do for ourselves. And not only will this lead to places of frustration, but it ultimately leads to places of resentment, creating a cycle and trail of poor relationships behind us. So, like I told her, I'll tell you, we need to create our values. And I'm going to use a definition, a custom definition that a coach of mine, Dr. Zeb, who I refer to often in some of my work because his work is phenomenal. He has a definition in this values thing that says your attitudes, perspectives, and beliefs, principles that govern your life among the world around you. And so when we consider our values, when we put out a list, 5 to 7 things, and it can be a little bit longer, of the things that you say you value, write it out. Write out this list. And the first thing that you ought to do is compare your life. Does my life measure up to the values that I say I carry? It's number one. But then number two, when you compare these to your relationships, does the relationship I'm contemplating, I'm considering, I'm weighing options on, does this align with the values that I say I carry? And if it doesn't, then this is a relationship that we shouldn't even find ourselves trying to rekindle, trying to create, or trying to force, or try to keep around. And we should be mindful of our values, because our values are ultimately going to make the decisions for us. And anytime you begin stepping outside of your values to make room for someone else who simply is not caring about what you have to give and does not desire to refill you as you're filling them, you will remain drained, you will remain empty, and you will remain frustrated at people who don't have the capacity to give you what you need, or simply don't desire to give you what you're asking for. And at some point, we have to be honest about the relationship and about the connection in order to accept it as it is, move forward with our values, whether it's with them or without them, and not abandoning our values, which ultimately leads to us abandoning ourselves and becoming inauthentic to carry relationships that we just simply shouldn't have. She was grateful. She was thankful for the conversation. She ultimately responded back with the thoughts of being mindful that she has a tendency to push away her values to really be there and be friends with people that she really cares a lot for. And I had to, really remind her in the same conversation that that is a degree of people pleasing, one of the highest degrees of people pleasing, when we find ourselves pushing away our values to make room for others in such a regard. And even though she hated hearing it, she admitted she needed to hear it. And it seems like she's doing well, as she did give an update on just not really going all out for him as she thought she initially was going to prior to our conversation, and seemingly aligning her values to move forward. Listen, I hope this conversation made sense. I hope it was helpful to you. If it was, type "caught it" in the comment section below. Follow for more as we continue navigating through our healing and doing relationships the right way, which starts with us doing the healing work on ourselves first, which sometimes looks like us really discerning and differentiating one-sided friendships and moving forward with our values so we do not find ourselves abandoning such in order to make room for people who either don't have the capacity to show up for us in the way that we may want them to, or they simply don't want to show up in the connection at all, giving us the opportunity to move forward and not stay in one-sided connections for people-pleasing reasons that ultimately drain us.